In a previous video, we looked at post-structuralism and at the way in which the structure of any language, including a visual language, rather than describing reality, is in fact a constructing device, often reflecting the interests of the ruling power. This aspect of postmodernism also intersects with postcolonialism, characterizing the historical era as one of neo-colonialism, that is, a new form of colonialism, in that the constructed images or narratives of the relation between former colonial powers and their former subjects reproduces the same colonial ideology by defining all cultures in relation to so-called Western culture. Deconstructing these defining narratives also reveals the same ideology at work in relation to ethnic groups within Western societies. JeanMichel Basquiat was born in Brooklyn in 1960 to his Haitian father and an American mother of Puerto Rican descent, and so Basquiat was fluent in Spanish, French, and English. At the age of 7, he was hit by a car, and his mother gave him a copy of Gray's Anatomy during his recuperation. The following year, his parents separated, and when Basquiat was 13, his mother was committed to a mental institution. At 14, he went to Puerto Rico for 2 years, and back in New York, he dropped out of high school and as a result was kicked out of home by his father. Sleeping rough, he studied at New York's public City As School and regularly sketched in the art collections of New York with Fab Five Freddy. At around this time, Basquiat started to graffiti with the pseudonym Samo, spelt S-A-M-O, with a copyright symbol, meaning the same old, with accompanying social or artistic commentaries. Basquiat sold postcards of his graffiti art for a living and met Warhol by selling postcards to him in a restaurant, the two artists remaining lifelong friends and collaborators. Having met the curator Diego Cortés, Basquiat started to paint on canvas. This image, Gringo Pilot, being one of his first works. It features many of Basquiat's trademarks, such as the crown, seen also in Red Kings, and the phrase Respeto Mundial, meaning universal respect, seen again in 1986. There is the repeated name of Paul Tibbets, the pilot of the Enola Gay, the plane which dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. Diego Cortés arranged Basquiat's first exhibition in the Times Square show of 1980. By 1981, at the age of 21, Basquiat was exhibiting at the Anina Nosei Gallery, producing some of his most famous works. This work shows his typical anatomical approach, perhaps influenced by his childhood Gray's Anatomy, exposing the innards of the body, just as Basquiat's style is a raw revelation of inner processes of creativity. However, these works are a celebration and a challenge. Just like graffiti art, with its exaggerated and calligraphic style and scale of gesture, Basquiat's canvases create a radically new and individual medium of expression. The upper hierarchies of the gallery system, Leo Castelli, the Whitney Gallery, and MoMA, refused to host him. This work, History of the Black People, from 1983, looks at the relationship between Egypt and Nubia, with Nubian masks on the left and the boat of Osiris on the right, drawing parallels with contemporary America, with the image of a black slave on the right-hand panel and the word Tennessee. African history was a common theme for Basquiat. Respeto Mundial, seen earlier, features a crocodile inscribed with the word Sebek, the ancient Egyptian crocodile-headed deity. A black graffiti artist, 25-year-old Michael Stewart, was arrested in September 1983 for writing on the wall of a First Avenue station. He was arrested and beaten unconscious, dying from a spinal cord injury in the upper neck resulting from blunt force trauma. All 6 policemen involved were acquitted by an all-white jury. Basquiat's painting uses a simplistic colour scheme and rendering of the police officers to emphasize their primitivism, in contrast to the shadow of the man they have killed. Basquiat spontaneously painted the image on the wall of Keith Haring's studio in the week of Michael Stewart's death. The piece of plasterboard now hangs in the Guggenheim. Basquiat's reception in the popular press was, as the artist himself pointed out, racist, with numerous references to slavery and his colour. Because he had been given a basement studio by Anina Nosset, the press said he was locked in order to paint, and called him the Black Picasso. He began to feel exploited by the gallery system, and under intense pressure from the galleries to create masterpiece after masterpiece, he turned to heroin use. Basquiat's work with his close friend Andy Warhol was badly received, and after Warhol's death in 1987, Basquiat's heroin use increased. After an attempt in 1988 to stop using, he died of a heroin overdose. Steve McQueen, who grew up in Ealing in West London, is well known for his feature-length films Hunger and 12 Years a Slave, both of which were critically acclaimed and won numerous awards at Cannes and the Oscars. Hunger, written by McQueen, relates Bobby Sands' hunger strike protest against the treatment of IRA prisoners. 12 Years a Slave is an adaptation of Solomon Northup's autobiographical story of enslavement and the physical abuse of the whip on the plantations of the Deep South. The first hunger strike took place just over 2 years after the United Kingdom had been found guilty by the European Court of Human Rights of human rights abuses regarding internment, and Solomon Northup's story shows a free man whose liberty, family, and dignity are taken from him. Both films, then, are about the struggle for human rights and against injustice in political systems, with the human body as the site of this political struggle. However, McQueen's earlier career, which culminated in his winning the Turner Prize in 1999, consisted of shorter films intended for gallery showing, which highlighted similar concerns to his feature films. Exodus, from 1997, is a video shot of a real event, of 2 black men each carrying a potted palm tree down a London street before getting on a bus. The film, along with its title, raises questions about the disenfranchisement of black people in UK society, with a sense of the lack of a stable existence, with the palm tree's roots in pots, not permanently growing in soil. Drumroll, from 1998, consisted of a film made from 3 cameras mounted on an old oil drum, which is rolled through the streets of Manhattan. 2 cameras are mounted on either end, and 1 camera films out through a hole in the barrel itself. The oil barrel has presumably made a long journey to get to Manhattan from an oil-producing country, and the constant disorienting rolling of the barrel and the contrary motions of the 3 screens make for an unsettling physical effect, the almost traumatic experience of the city, with the idea of rolling as having no place to stop, a metaphor for diaspora. More recently, Static, from 2009, shows a similar experience of the city of New York as a critique of its welcome for huddled masses yearning to breathe free. It's shot from a helicopter which constantly swirls around the Statue of Liberty, questioning the ideal contained in the personification of liberty by looking at the physical object's industrial construction, its contrast with the reality of its background, and its tarnished staining. Again, McQueen is looking at a body, or a representation of one, as the site of political discourse. Yinka Shonibare was born in London in 1962 and lived between the ages of 3 and 17 in Lagos, Nigeria, before returning to the UK. At the age of 17, Shonibare contracted transverse myelitis and became permanently paralysed on one side of his body. Shonibare moved to London to study fine art and do a master's at Goldsmiths. Starting with this work, Double Dutch, from 1994, Shonibare has used materials with complex roots in order to critique simplistic ideas of cultural identity, showing them to be artificial constructs. As the professor of History of Art and African American Studies at Yale, Kabina Mercer, puts it, in neo-conceptualist installations using wax print fabric such as Double Dutch, 1994, Yinka Shonibare eludes the heavy-handed approach to ethnic authenticity in official multiculturalism by unravelling the intercultural story woven into the threads of his found object. Seen as exotically African, the material originated in Indonesian batik, was reinvested for mass manufacture by Dutch and English textile industries, was exported to West and Central African markets as luxury goods, and then appropriated by Afro-Americans as a badge of counter-modern blackness. Much of Shonibare's oeuvre uses this unravelling. In Sensation, the seminal exhibition of Charles Saatchi's collection of YBA's art at the Royal Academy in London in 1997, Shonibare exhibited 3 headless mannequins dressed in his signature Dutch wax fabric, but in distinctly colonial era European dresses, in an adaptation of his work from earlier in the year, Dressing Down. The headlessness, representing an absence of humanity, Shonibare also used in his Scramble for Africa, a representation of the Berlin Conference of 1884, in which the colonial powers agreed on which territory each would invade. Shonibare also creates staged photographs, such as this series from 2012, in which he poses as a Victorian dandy throughout the course of a typical day. The Victorian era saw the greatest expansion of the British Empire, which by its peak would subjugate almost a quarter of the world's population, including Nigeria in 1900. Shonibare subverts the nostalgic and cleansed version of history, which erases the history of colonial exploitation and oppression, by acting as a reminder of its past. Shonibare further subverts nostalgia for nobility and high culture through a representation of a descent into acts of debauchery. In 2010, Shonibare was commissioned to create a work for the 4th plinth in Trafalgar Square, and Shonibare is arguably the only artist to link the work to its historical site, commemorating the Battle of Trafalgar, by creating a model of Nelson's ship, the Victory, in a bottle, with Shonibare's distinctive Dutch wax material for its sails. Hugh Locke was born in Edinburgh, the son of a sculptor and painter, and grew up in Guyana before returning to the UK to study, doing his MA at the Royal College of Art. Locke deconstructs the monumentalization of the colonial past through statuary, by imposing his own decorations on statues featuring supporters of the colonial system. Washington had 300 slaves, whom he treated cruelly, approving of the whipping of the female slaves. Victoria, as we have seen, expanded the empire considerably, and Livingstone assisted in making that expansion into Eastern Africa possible. Churchill's use of language to describe other ethnic groups in the empire was hideously racist, considering whites to be a higher grade race than others. Hence, Locke creates artworks by drawing on or placing objects on photographs of the statues and then photographing the collage. In Churchill's case, the statue's photograph is overpainted in vibrant polychrome images, which contrast to the Eurocentric and classical tradition of the era of the statues. As Locke points out, there has been a parallel whitewashing of the originally polychrome statues of antiquity, replacing tanned skin with white marble. In the case of Locke's treatment of Washington's image, slaves hang from chains from his wrists. Locke used this same superimposition technique to create works from colonial historical documents in the series entitled Song of the South. The documents are bonds issued by the Confederate Congress to raise money for the Civil War against the Union, whose abolition of slavery threatened to destroy the economy of the Southern states. Locke decorates the bonds with images from the South, including black Confederate soldiers coerced to fight by the slave economy. Immediately after the defeat of the Confederacy and the abolition of slavery, the first Ku Klux Klan was formed, as part of the criminalization of black people in the South that would re-enslave them in chain gangs or murder them. And hence Locke decorates the soldiers with these prophetic images. Locke had originally wanted to decorate the original statues of Churchill and others, but with permission for this denied, the decorated photographs of the proposal became the documentary artwork. Locke was shortlisted to create a sculpture of the 4th plinth in Trafalgar Square, but the proposal, images from which can be seen here, was not selected. The title, Sikander, is Urdu for Alexander the Great, who invaded territory all the way from Europe to the Himalayas in a parallel with the British Empire. And Locke's equestrian statue was a replica of that of Field Marshal Sir George White, who fought in India, Afghanistan, Burma, Egypt, and South Africa. Kara Walker was born in California. Her father is the artist and professor of art Larry Walker. At the age of 13, Kara moved with her family to Atlanta, Georgia, and from then on, her teenage years were a daily experience of racism. At first, as an artist, she resisted making issue-based art, influenced partly by her father's search for universality in art, but eventually saw that she could not, as an artist, ignore her formative experiences. Her early works were of large-scale silhouettes, and this one, from 1997, is based on 19th century presentations of history known as cycloramas. Rejecting painting as belonging to a patriarchal tradition, Walker used silhouettes with their connotations of a second-class art form associated with fictions and dirty jokes, but also as a form of portraiture reserved for the gentry. The narratives and their form refer to, but undermine, the fictional romances of the plantation genre, while for me the use of the cyclorama also seems to make a postmodern point about the way in which a particular version of history constructs itself to the exclusion of all other voices, excluding through the use of caricature, in which the silhouette form excels. The title of this work, also a reference to the plantation romance, is Slavery, Slavery, presenting a grand and lifelike panoramic journey into picturesque southern slavery, or Life at Old Virginny's Hole, Sketches from Plantation Life. See the particular institution as never before, all cut from black paper by the able hand of Kara Elizabeth Walker, an emancipated negress and leader in her cause. The narrative's images undercut the mock grandeur of the title, showing the nightmarish ideology of the white antebellum South, a fantasy of superiority, belied by sadistic cruelty and sexual coercion. In 2014, Walker agreed to the commission to create a sculpture for the soon-to-be-demolished Domino Sugar Factory in Brooklyn on the basis of her fascination with molasses, which coated the wall, floors, and rafters of the factory, and in order to move away from the earlier part of her career based on the silhouettes. Her research showed molasses and brown sugar to be associated with black or brown bodies, the label for Aunt Dinah molasses being one example. Moreover, sugarcane plantations in the antebellum Deep South were worked by slaves. Again, Walker's title has an element of pastiche in it, and the name Subtlety is, historically, a reference to a sugared sculpture for aristocratic feasts. The full title is A Subtlety, or the Marvelous Sugar Baby, an homage to the unpaid and overworked artisans who have refined our sweet tastes from the cane fields to the kitchens of the New World on the occasion of the demolition of the Domino sugar refining plant. The work is a sphinx, coated in sugar, with the body of a lion but with a mammy stereotype of a black housekeeper as its head. According to Patricia Turner, professor of African American and African Studies at UC Davis, the mammy stereotype bears no relation to domestic slaves in the antebellum South, who were fed very little, but were instead a created fiction of happy sexless servitude during the Jim Crow period. Walker's Sphinx, though, as Walker says, is a powerful character. She gains her power by upsetting expectations one after the other.